Folks. So Heather, I was telling people before you came on that you and I for Ring of Fire, which is available as a podcast, I think it's already out, discussed at great length, probably longer than we had, much longer than we would ever want to, but certainly longer than we had anticipated, the Tara Reid Joe Biden situation, and there's obviously some new developments this morning in terms of Biden putting out a statement and going on the Morning Joe show. So let's just recap what we talked about yesterday briefly and how this implicates it. And we should say up front, like, I know that there would be just about anybody else in the race, maybe short of a couple of other people that you would want as opposed to Joe Biden. I think you know that about me. And I also just set the framework of this conversation. I think it's very hard for me to see how there can be any type of like really major public pressure brought to bear against Joe Biden that wouldn't make a significant number of people who voted for Joe Biden, and I would argue maybe the vast majority of them, feel like they have been, sort of disenfranchised in some way. I think there's only two ways out of this, it seems to me. One is Joe Biden gets past it, or Joe Biden steps down. But just recap what we had said yesterday, and then we can talk about sort of the next sort of, I guess, installment of this.
Well, as you said, I mean, it was a very in-depth conversation. If you're interested in our views on this, I would hope that everybody would tune into that podcast, because we went really deep and I think hit a lot of the nuance of this story and the political implications, which I think we're all concerned with, regardless of where we stand on the particular issue. The political implications are, vast and extremely important. We're in the middle of a global catastrophe. We have an absolute, ignoramus at the helm. Now he's starting to gin up some kind of a war with China. I mean, this is crazy time. And the fact that we're all on lockdown and it's very unlikely that there's going to be a real convention in the summer makes the idea of replacing the candidate, unless, as you point out, he steps down, that the idea of trying to do that in any way that would bring confidence to the American people that the Democrats are actually better at, perhaps leading us out of this catastrophe. I think that brings that into question. So we've got a real problem on our hands, and I think we acknowledged that and went through it. And I'll just address, if you want to, hear more about that, listen to the majority report, or to the Ring of Fire. But I will say this, because this morning it was a little early for me, so I only caught some of it, and then read the statement, of course. And you and I had both talked about the way that people, that any politician who gets into this kind of a situation in a campaign, the way that they can deal with it appropriately. And we talked about how, Barack Obama dealt with the Reverend Wright thing and all that. And we talked, about the history and people like Gary Hart, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, and our feeling was that it was very important for Biden to come out and say something. We didn't know when we did it, and it was just hours before it was announced that he was going to, that he had to come out and he had to say things, and he had to do it in a certain way in order to be respectful of his accuser, respectful of women generally, respectful of the issue, the larger issue here that we're all kind of still, grappling with. And I don't think we ever said that he could just put it behind him. That's never going to happen. I think we all know that this issue will be out there. But the question is whether or not it will be something that, the right will certainly try to weaponize it, but whether it will be something that's so salient, barring any new information, of course, that it actually forces him to resign, which I think you and I both agree is the only way that this could happen. And even then, Sam, the process for trying to replace him will be ugly and messy,
Right.
and really, really difficult. So I think my opinion is, just to put it into this, is that I think he did fine with that. The process has begun of dealing with this thing that's been hanging out there for a long time. I think he waited too long, but he did it. And his statement was good. I thought, he gave due respect to the issue itself, and he did not in any way demean her, which is a very important thing. And, he denied it unequivocally. There's still a lot of stuff hanging out about, his records and all that. And that's not the end of it. We're going to be hearing about that for a long time. And I'm sort of agnostic on the political wisdom of opening up those records, but that will be dealt with in due course. The main issue of how Joe Biden responded, I think the first step that he took today worked out pretty well. I think he was, confident and compassionate, and was the most important part, cognizant of the seriousness of the issue. I think that came through. So that's where I am today. Who knows what'll happen tomorrow, right? I mean, these are the kind of stories that they unfold, and they just keep, there's always things coming. And I just want to warn everybody, anybody who thinks that the fact that Donald Trump has NDAs on, I don't know how many hundreds of women, how many people he's paid off, how many women have accused him credibly, how much we have him on tape saying things like grab him by the pussy. No matter how much of that stuff is out there, he is 100% shameless, and he will use this.
Right. Just without a doubt.
You just don't even think, for a second that somehow that's neutralized because of Donald Trump. I mean, we'll be screaming it, how dare he? What about Trump? But it won't make any difference. So just get ready. If the rallies resume or whatever he has to do, this will become part of the story. It is part of the story. And, on a political level, I think everybody just has to accept that. And the other thing we can hope is that, it doesn't sort of metastasize into something so damaging that, it hurts Joe Biden, but he refuses to step down. That's the worst possible scenario as we go down the road. But for the moment, I think we're sort of, we are where we are. And,
yeah.
I didn't think it was too bad. I guess I'll just say that.
Right. I mean, my feeling is, and I think the way that we talked about this, there was two basic buckets which you have to address. Is like, the veracity of the allegations and the political analysis. And from a veracity of the allegations thing, like, we're never going to know the truth. That's just, right. We can't know the truth. Personally, I think that I can understand reason for skepticism because of the sort of the nature of how the accusation has sort of rolled out over time a little bit. But I also I'm of the mind that it's very hard to judge someone who has been through something like that and to assess, and by judge, I mean, assess. Like, I don't know how I would react in that scenario. I have no idea. I'm so far away removed from it. And certainly, there's research that shows that, people's stories evolve. One doesn't know. And so I don't think what happened was so out of character of Joe Biden or the time, frankly. So it's not impossible for me to believe. But, generally, and maybe there would be value in having some type of outside investigation, but he's sort of, on some level, it's happening, right? I mean, there are many, many reporters who are looking into this. Certainly, they're going to, now that he's, given permission to the National Archives to release any information regarding any complaints that may have been levied by her at that time, we have, in some sorts, an investigation. And I think that is wholly appropriate. The personal documents that he has from the office, I don't think are relevant. It's certainly, the complaints certainly wouldn't be there. And the last thing I want is another sort of like, he had a server in his basement at one point or so, exactly. Type of situation. And so I think that's wise in terms of the political analysis. And in terms of the political analysis, I think, you and I, like we said yesterday, he's going to come out and he's going to address this, and he's going to stop looking to other people to, deflect. He's going to come and address this head on, to the extent that he has the ability to do so, which I frankly perceive as, relatively limited in terms of his skill sets right now. I think he did fairly well. It's a little bit graded on a curve. And yeah, I'm with you that I don't, this is not going to go away. And the question is, will he have convinced enough Democratic voters that the people who want to continue to push this and are interested in pushing it, both for, I think, good faith and bad faith reasons, because I think there's both out there, frankly. And I'm not talking on the right. On the right, I think a lot of it's bad faith, obviously. But on the left, on the left, broadly speaking, I think there's good faith. I think there's bad faith. I got an email from a listener, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. It was rather, it was pretty moving, and it was long, and we're just going to refer to her as listener CJ. But the gist of it was that she is a rape victim, survivor, and she has, this moments like this are very, very painful, particularly for people who have been through something like this. They see the response to the allegations that Tara Reid had, and she wasn't raped by anyone who was, a public figure in any way. But they see these allegations and the response to these allegations, and it has a visceral impact on them. And she said, I don't think I can bring myself to vote for Joe Biden because of that. However, I would encourage everybody to vote for Joe Biden because, there are much, much larger things at stake. And it was an interesting sort of take on this where she's like, I physically don't know that I have the ability to do it. Now,
I totally respect that.
I
really
do too.
I respect that position. And let me just say this too. Normally, in the case of somebody, let's just use Al Franken, for instance. There was a lot of controversy about those charges, and there still was a lot of bitterness among a lot of people who think that it wasn't properly adjudicated, or that he was unfairly tagged, and the whole thing. And I understand that. And, I have a strong sense of justice. I'm a big civil libertarian, this kind of thing. There's a whole part of me, I'm torn, right? As a woman, as a feminist, as a person who cares about civil liberties and justice, all that bothers me. But when I think about someone like Al Franken, for instance, I think, it's a shame that happened, if it was unfair, if it was whatever. But, it's just a job with him. He was replaced by a fine senator. It's not the end of the world, right? This isn't the end of the world if Al Franken isn't a senator anymore. I mean, we can carry on. There was no legal ramification. He wasn't going to lose his freedom. He was going to lose a job that was dependent on the public, voting for him. This is a different situation, and it sort of plays into what you said about your email correspondent. This is not it. It's Joe Biden won't go to jail over this. The statute of limitations is long past. The evidence is too flimsy, probably, for any kind of a criminal case. And normally I'd say, hey, but it's bad enough that maybe this guy shouldn't be a senator or whatever. But because of the situation that we're in, because of the messiness of trying to replace him under anything but, the most dire circumstances, the fact that we're faced with, an election that looks much closer than it should be under the circumstances, and we're in the middle of a global catastrophe, the stakes are way, way, way higher than they usually are. And that's why you can see someone like this person saying, I can't do it because my own personal, I can't. But please don't let that be a reason for you not to do it, because the stakes are so high. And I respect that position, because the stakes are so high. I mean, this is much, much bigger than your normal situation. I mean, if Harvey Weinstein loses his job and his company, it's not the end of the world. If Donald Trump wins again, it may be the end of the world. So we're having to take into consideration a whole set of issues that are playing into this that are much bigger than we normally do in this situation. So, you know, I would just say that person, you know, good for her for being able to sort of say that despite her own personal pain at having to deal with something like this.
I agree. I was terribly impressed by that stance where, you know, completely understandable you would have a painful, visceral reaction to it, but also to be able to sort of step back and even with that, even feeling that kind of pain, realize that there's a lot of other people who are going to be suffering as a function of Donald Trump winning a re-election. And, you know, at one point, I think there's also, you know, just to pivot back to the political and then we'll move on. I do think that there is, you know, has been, and I think this is where we were at yesterday, like a legitimate political concern founded on that same attitude that the emailer expressed for encouraging people to vote for Biden, that this would make this would hurt Biden's chances of winning. And that is, I think, you know, where we were yesterday when we were talking about this and positing like he's going to have to do something like X, and we'll see if that, you know, salvages and he's able to put this behind him. That X happened today, and we will see if it was enough. So I, you know, the one thing that I am sort of like, you know, and I have been relentless in my criticism, and I feel like well warranted of Biden's campaign and his abilities, and prior to that, his policies and whatnot. But I'm glad they did this today, as opposed to waiting anymore. From a political perspective, this needs to be resolved, at least in terms of what they're going to do and how people are going to react as soon as possible. Because if Biden has a failure to get past this, we all need to know sooner rather than later. Yeah. And then we also got to, you know, hope that there isn't another, that there aren't more accusations out there that we haven't heard beyond the fact that we all know the guy doesn't seem to have any respect for anybody's personal space, as a matter of course. But we, you know, that's where we're at. All right, let's pivot from that, Heather, because again, we just added another 15 minutes to that conversation that we did yesterday at 35. I mean,
one of those
new information, but there's a lot going on.